In the Philippines, there is a word that has no clean English translation. The word is jigil, and it refers to that trembling, overwhelming urge you feel when something is so precious, so small, so impossibly fragile that you don't know whether to squeeze it or shield it from the world. And in 2019, when a 14-year-old girl named Alexandra Eala stood in a dormitory room on the Spanish island of Majorca, 6,000 miles from her family, and learned that the grandfather who put a tennis racket in her hands had died, she understood that word in a way no dictionary could ever teach her. This is not a story about rankings. It is not a story about forehands or backhands or the angle of a serve toss. This is a story about what it costs to carry an entire country on a body that was still growing when the journey began, and about the ghost of a man named Lolo Bob whose fingerprints are on every ball Alex Eala has ever struck. Roberto "Bobby" Maniego was not a professional tennis coach. He was a club player, the kind of man who showed up at Valle Verde Country Club in Pasig City with a worn grip and a stack of library books about footwork and racket angles. He was the father of Rosemary Maniego Eala, a former national swimmer who had won bronze in the 100-meter backstroke at the 1985 Southeast Asian Games, and he carried that same stubborn athletic gene into retirement. When his grandchildren were small, he appointed himself their sporting mentor. He coached cousins, nephews, his grandson Miko, and eventually the youngest, a left-handed girl named Alex who was 4 years old and barely taller than the racket she was swinging. No one planned a professional career from those sessions. Bobby Maniego just liked tennis. He liked reading about it, watching tape, picking apart what the great players did differently. He ran Alex through drills at the country club after school, correcting her grip, pushing her through footwork ladders, embedding a toughness that had nothing to do with technique and everything to do with showing up when you did not feel like it. He was not gentle. His granddaughter would later call it tough love, and she would say it with a smile that made clear she understood exactly what that phrase meant coming from a man who had never charged anyone a single peso for a lesson in his life. By the time Alex was 8 years old, something had become obvious. The girl was different. Not just coordinated, not just fast, but different in the way she read the ball, in her willingness to compete against older players without flinching. She was different in the way she processed losing, which was not with tears but with questions. What did I do wrong? What can I change? These are not normal questions from an 8-year-old. These are the questions of someone who has been trained, from the very beginning, to treat tennis not as play but as problem-solving. And that was Bobby Maniego's gift. He did not teach her to hit a ball. He taught her to think. At 12, she won Les Petits as in Tarbes, France, one of the most prestigious under-14 tournaments in the world. She did not drop a single set the entire event. That performance caught the attention of scouts from the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, Majorca, and within months, the offer arrived, a scholarship to train and study at one of the most elite tennis institutions on earth. The annual tuition at the academy runs approximately $60,000. For a Filipino family, even one with resources, the financial and emotional mathematics of such a decision are staggering. But this is where the story fractures in a way that most sports narratives gloss over. Accepting that scholarship meant that a 13-year-old girl would leave the Philippines, leave her parents Mike and Riza, leave her brother Miko, leave the country club courts where her grandfather still showed up every afternoon, and move alone to an island in the Mediterranean where she knew no one, spoke limited Spanish, and would be the only Filipino in the building. Think about what 13 looks like. 13 is 8th grade. 13 is sleepovers and awkward school dances and figuring out who your friends are. 13 is the age when most kids are negotiating for later bedtimes, not negotiating the loneliness of waking up in a foreign country where the closest family member is a 10-hour flight away. Alex Eala did not get a normal adolescence. She has said this herself, plainly and without self-pity, in interviews where journalists have asked her what she missed. "I'm not going to lie," she told ABS-CBN in 2022, "at 17, there are sacrifices." She did not elaborate. She did not need to. The elaboration was written into the fact that she was conducting the interview from a continent her childhood friends had never visited. Her parents, Mike and Riza, restructured their entire lives around her career. Mike Eala is a business executive. Riza Eala served as the chief financial officer of Globe Telecom, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the Philippines, until 2024. These are not people who lacked professional obligations. Yet they found a way to be present at nearly every tournament their daughter played, flying across time zones, juggling conference calls from hotel lobbies, because they understood that their daughter was living an existence no 20-year-old should navigate without a net. It's almost hard to call it a sacrifice, Mike Eala told Spin.ph in December 2025 at the Southeast Asian Games in Bangkok, where Alex served as the Philippine delegation's flag bearer, because we enjoy every minute being with Alex. But then he added the quieter truth: the bigger the goal, the more commitment, the more sacrifice you need to give up. And Bobby Maniego, the man who started all of it? He never saw her play a professional match. He passed away in 2019 when Alex was 14, already embedded in the Nadal Academy, already climbing junior rankings, already becoming someone the tennis world was beginning to notice. He did not see her win the 2020 Australian Open Girls doubles title. He did not see her claim the 2021 French Open Girls doubles alongside Oksana Selikhmetova. He did not see her stand on the court at Flushing Meadows in September 2022 and lift the U.S. Open Girls singles trophy, becoming the first Filipino ever to win a junior Grand Slam title. He did not see any of it. And this is the part of the story that Alex Eala carries with her in a way that no ranking number can capture. "Whenever I do something big, I think about him," she said at a meet and greet in Manila in 2025, her voice steady, but her eyes telling a different story. It would have been so nice for him to know. I'm sure he does, but for him to actually see and experience these great things happening to me and to share it with my family would have meant a lot. In January 2026, at the inaugural Philippine Women's Open in her home country, she spoke about him again, this time with the cameras close enough to catch the tremor in her voice. "My Lolo was a very big part of my life and my early career. He was my coach ever since I started before I moved to Spain. So much of my foundation, my mentality, my bravery on court, comes from the tough love and sacrifice he gave me and my brother." There it is again, that word. Sacrifice. It runs through this story like a thread you cannot cut. The professional career that followed her junior triumphs was not a straight line. Between 2020 and 2024, Eala collected 5 ITF singles titles, grinding through the lower tiers of the women's tour. The W15S and W25S and W100S that most tennis fans never see, playing in half-empty clubs in Tunisia and Thailand and Luxembourg, building a ranking point by point, loss by loss. She failed to qualify for the main draw at all 4 Grand Slams in 2024. She finished that year ranked number 158. The junior champion, the Nadal Academy graduate, the girl who had left home at 13, was stuck outside the top 150, and there was no guarantee she was going to get out. And then Miami happened. March 2025. Ranked 140th in the world, Eala entered the Miami Open on a wild card. She was not supposed to be there. She was not supposed to beat Elena Ostapenko in the second round, a former French Open champion. She was absolutely not supposed to beat Madison Keys in the third round, the reigning Australian Open champion and world number 5, in straight sets, 6-4, 6-2. And when she walked onto the court for the quarterfinals against Iga Swiatek, the world number 2, 5-time Grand Slam champion, the most dominant force in women's tennis over the previous 3 years, the reasonable expectation was that the run was over. She won 6-2, 7-5. When the final ball landed, Alex Eala stood on the baseline and did not move. She did not pump her fist. She did not scream. She stood perfectly still, as though the moment was too large to fit inside a reaction. "My mind is blank right now," she told Sky Sports afterward. She had become the first wildcard in history to defeat 3 Grand Slam champions in straight sets at a single WTA event. She had become the first Filipino ever to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal. She was 19 years old. Jessica Pegula stopped her in the semifinals. But by then, the earthquake had already happened. Alex Eala jumped 65 spots in the rankings in a single week, entering the top 100 for the first time, the first Filipino woman ever to do so. And in the Philippines, something shifted. The country has 115 million people. It has 7,641 islands. And until Alex Eala, it had never produced a tennis player who mattered on the world stage. There are 115 million Filipinos, she told Clay Tennis magazine in Sao Paulo later that year, and I am the first tennis player in history. Sometimes it's so crazy. The comparison that kept surfacing was to Manny Pacquiao. Filipino journalists invoked the boxing legend whose fights once stopped traffic across the entire archipelago, whose bouts emptied streets and filled living rooms from Manila to Mindanao. Eala deflected the comparison with characteristic grace. "Oh my God, hindi naman ganun," she said in a January 2026 press conference, laughing. "Iba naman si Manny Pacquiao. Nasa ibang level na siya." She was speaking in Tagalog, and the fact that she code switches naturally between English, Filipino, and Spanish says something about the bridges she has been building since she was 13. The rest of 2025 unfolded like a controlled demolition of every barrier the Philippines had ever faced in tennis. She reached her first WTA Tour final at Eastbourne, losing to Maya Joint in a devastating match that went to a championship tiebreak, 10-12, after Eala had held 4 championship points. She cried on the court. Not from disappointment alone, but from the accumulation of everything it had taken to get there. She then debuted at all 4 Grand Slams in a single season, winning her first-ever Grand Slam main draw match at the U.S. Open by defeating 14th-seeded Clara Tauson in a third-set comeback from 5-1 down. The tiebreak went to 13-11. "It makes what I do bigger than myself," she said afterward, and in the stands, Filipino flags were everywhere, held by people who had flown thousands of miles or driven hours across American highways to be in the building. By the start of 2026, Eala had climbed to world number 50. Then came Dubai, where she beat world number 8 Jasmine Paolini 6-1, 7-6, and looked into the crowd and asked a question that had nothing to do with tennis. "How many of you have prayed for me?" The stadium erupted. She reached the quarterfinals before falling to Coco Gauff. At Indian Wells, she beat Gauff herself, 6-2, before the American retired and advanced to the 4th round. Her ranking peaked at world number 29 on March 16, 2026, making her the highest-ranked Filipino tennis player in history, male or female, by a margin that is not close. At Indian Wells, something else became visible. Hundreds of fans packed a tiny practice court under the Palm Springs sun to watch her warm up. On the adjacent courts, Alexander Zverev and Taylor Fritz practiced to scattered applause. Eala's crowd dwarfed theirs. Tournament executive Philippe Dor told Front Office Sports, "We love every minute of it. We benefit from it. We promote it." Novak Djokovic called the attention, "a good problem to have." Andy Roddick said, "This is the type of story you cheer for because it's great for tennis." But there is a shadow side to carrying a nation. After her first-round loss at the Linz Open in April 2026 and her subsequent first-round exit at Stuttgart against Leylah Fernandez, the hate arrived. Online messages telling her she was average, that she did not deserve her fans, that she was overrated. The intensity of Filipino online culture, the same passion that fills stadiums and turns practice sessions into events, also generates a ferocity that cuts in both directions. Eala has addressed it directly. "I choose to focus on constructive criticism instead of dwelling on comments that merely instigate hate and negativity," she told ABS-CBN in February 2026. She was 20 years old, and she was already developing the vocabulary of someone who has learned that fame is a weather system you cannot control. And still, through all of it, the ghost of Lolo Bob sits in the chair. When she was asked at the Philippine Women's Open in January 2026 what she carries from him, she did not talk about forehands or footwork. She said, He was the one who showed up every day and put in the work. That sentence contains everything. It contains a man who read library books about tennis because he could not afford a coaching certification. It contains a country club in Pasig where a 4-year-old learned to fight. It contains a flight to Mallorca that a grandfather encouraged but never got to see completed. It contains the weight of being first. Alex Eala is 20 years old. She has no WTA title yet. Her serve remains a documented weakness. Her ranking, after peaking at 29, has slid back to 45 as of April 2026. The road to the Grand Slam trophies she dreams of is still brutally long, and the players ahead of her are not getting weaker. But the thing about Eala that separates her from the analytical frame of most tennis stories is that the numbers have never been the point. The point is the 4-year-old on the shell courts. The point is the grandfather who never charged a peso. The point is a 13-year-old boarding a plane alone. The point is a mother who ran the finances of a billion-dollar corporation and still found a way to be courtside in Guadalajara, in Dubai, in Indian Wells. The point is a father who said the quiet part out loud. It's not a normal situation for her to be so involved in sports at such a young age and at this level. None of it has been normal. And that is precisely why 115 million people are watching.